Welcome back to the Diabetes Podcast. If you've been with us over the last several episodes, you know we've been pulling apart the dirty dozen 12 core defects that drive the development and progression of type 2 diabetes, based on the work of Dr. Ralph DeFronzo. Today, we close the loop. We've covered beta cell dysfunction, insulin resistance, glucagon excess, brain signaling, the gut microbiome, islet amyloid polypeptides, and today, we bring it all home with the final ever-present storm, inflammation and oxidative stress. These aren't just bystanders, they're accelerators. Let's explore how these two forces weave through every core defect and what you can actually do about it. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
And I am Amber.
And Amber, I'm glad we're almost done with this because I tell you what, it's been a lot to process.
Yep. So let's just jump right in.
All right. Tell us about inflammation and oxidative stress. Well, first off,
That's a loaded question.
This might be the broadest topic of anything that we've covered so far because inflammation affects everything. Mm-hmm. So if you can tell us about, I guess very broadly, about the normal state of inflammation, because everyone has this. This is not I don't think there's any way to avoid some level of inflammation in your life. It would not be uncommon. This is not specific to diabetes.
Yes.
Right?
At some point in your life, you are going to have inflammation.
Yeah.
However, it's hoped to be acute and not chronic systemic inflammation.
What do you mean by, can you explain a little bit better acute versus chronic?
Yes.
Okay.
Acute is, I got shot and there is a foreign body in my body. And so inflammation is there to promote healing in that area, to keep you from dying from said thing, like to really protect your body from that. So I
smashed my thumb with a hammer. It got bigger. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And in a healthy body, inflammation is very tightly controlled. So if you have an injury, you have an infection, it's going to flare up. And then as it produces those killer T cells that can match the virus or match whatever's going on, once the macrophages eat them all up and get them out of your body, that inflammation recedes.
That would be if I have a puncture and something got in, right?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that can cause inflammation. You can have a viral infection. You could have a bacterial infection. You could have an acute wound, which is what you mentioned. You know, a lot of things that could do that. Ear infection, urinary tract infection, any of those. So, or a bout of just food poisoning, something like that. So oxidative stress is sort of these natural byproducts of metabolism, and it's buffered by antioxidants, enzymes, and cellular repair systems. So you've got this stress that happens. So let me back up. We were talking about infection and all those bad things. You're going to have oxidative stress all the time. Just breathing creates some level of stress and inflammation. So I don't recommend you stop breathing. We want to continue to do that. But then you have a balance in your body to get rid of those. And that's the antioxidants, enzymes, those cellular repair systems.
As it relates to oxidative stress, I think you talked about rust in the last episode. And I can't remember what it was I was reading, but they described oxygen. It seems to have many common things, with almost like a poison, right? Like it's required for every single cellular process, but on a long enough timeline, that oxidative stress will kill you. The byproducts of processing the oxygen are at a long, and we're talking very obviously lifetime of a human.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that's why we don't live to be 150 or 200. You know,
processing oxygen is hard,
but we are uniquely made to do it. So, well, not that uniquely, but anyway. So let's talk about the dysfunction in type 2.
Okay.
Shall we? So probably 30% of the population has some underlying low-grade chronic inflammation. So we talked about acute, and then you have chronic inflammation. And this is very closely related to obesity, very closely related to type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of other sort of lifestyle factors that could come along with low-grade inflammation, smoking, secondhand smoking,
Right.
poor sleep.
Stress management, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of different things. High altitude, like weird things you wouldn't think of always, but that you have this low-grade inflammation. And what's really interesting is that balance between the antioxidants, the cellular repair systems, and the oxidative stress is broken.
Okay.
So you've got these inflammatory cytokines, namely things like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, C-reactive protein. They flood the body's system and create these, as you were saying with oxidation, create these reactive oxygen species. I'll probably sometimes call them ROS just for fun. They overwhelm the body's defenses, and it's really central to the disease process of type 2. And it's really hard to separate like type 2 from obesity, from metabolic disease, stuff like any of these central adiposity, meaning you're storing fat around your midsection. Some of the inflammatory processes in this, they all overlap and intertwine to some degree.
Well, I mean, we've talked about at length on several podcasts, I think, the need to try to reduce visceral fat as much as we can, preferably through diet and behaviors.
And I think what's interesting, it's that inflammation not only drives insulin resistance, but it's also like that snowball effect, that avalanche effect that we've been talking about. It's a consequence of insulin resistance and beta cell function, or beta cell dysfunction rather, where you have those tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 6, C-reactive protein. Those things are really playing key roles in that metabolic disruption. And it really weaves in and throughout all 11, this is the 12th, of those core defects of type 2. And it's very much entwined in the pathology that's going on.
2 questions. I guess kind of, is this the first of the 12 core defects to kind of manifest, like obviously well prior to a diagnosis of prediabetes or diabetes? You know, is this the first thing that someone can expect to experience this kind of low grade inflammation?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, how do I know that I have this other than just I don't feel good or I is there a test I can? You're inflamed. What does that look like?
We talked about elevated insulin levels as a test, and that is not a perfect test. It is one thing that you could look at, but as I've said, there is lack of continuity across labs, I guess you could say. I mean, there are things like waist to hip ratio where you could look at your risk of central adiposity and your risk where that's concerned. You could.
Does that differ for males and females as far as like what a good waist to hip ratio is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a different ratio for each. But in terms of how do you know if you have chronic low grade inflammation, you might feel tired.
Yeah.
You might be on the precipice between overweight and obesity.
Okay.
In terms of labs though, it's hard to check per se. An ELISA test could look for some pro-inflammatory kind of markers, but you're not going and getting that from Quest Labs or LabCorp. That's more research-based stuff.
Okay. If I've noticed my midsection is getting bigger disproportionately to the, like, I'm not getting taller anymore.
If I'm getting wider
if
rather
I continue
than
to grow
taller.
laterally, is that probably a safe indicator that there's some degree of chronic inflammation going on?
I mean, it's definitely a
Particularly around my
cause
midsection.
Yeah, it would be a cause for concern.
Okay.
Yeah. To examine like what's going on here.
Yeah.
Like pause and reflect. Yeah. So I guess the best thing to do would kind of just do an overview of the 11 core defects that we've covered so far and look at like where this plays a role, which was one of the more challenging things to do, to kind of distill that in each area. But essentially with muscle insulin resistance, you have a fatty buildup, you have lipid buildup, which activates these inflammatory signals, and that interferes with insulin signaling. And then in the liver, you've got fat accumulation there. And mostly people who I speak to will say, I've been diagnosed with fatty liver disease. And you can kind of see sometimes when you have fatty liver disease, if that area under your ribs is protruding, and it's not, doesn't feel like your stomach, and it's not that lower abdomen, but it's there.
Well, it's probably disproportionately on one side than the other as well. So it wouldn't be just
sometimes, but it kind of can also sometimes come with some fluid accumulation there too, and just fat in general around the visceral organs. So it doesn't always like stick out on one side, but that's really because the liver is creating, it creates this unchecked making of new glucose. That's really where you get your fasting hyperglycemia or fasting high blood sugars, the part where people go to sleep and their sugar is 100 and they wake up and their sugar is 180 and they know they didn't sleepwalk into the kitchen and grab food. That's the part that they're scratching their head about. Then you've got adipose tissue dysfunction where the fat cells are so engorged, so enlarged that they leak inflammatory cytokines and they attract macrophages. And macrophages have a really big role in inflammation. They're what's trying to eat up all of the bad stuff, if you will. And then you've got the decreased incretin effect, and that inflammation in the gut lowers the production of glucagon like peptide 1 and blunts that incretin effect. Then you have the alpha cell dysfunction, where the alpha cells, the ability for them to sense glucose is impaired by this inflammatory process, which worsens the blood sugar highs. You have inflammation in the pancreatic Langerhans beta cell islets, which is called insulitis, which is just inflammation of those insulin cells. And that results in a reduction of the beta cell number and function. And again, these macrophages are coming in and play a role in the inflammation that you see. And that's where you get those insulin polypeptides that are misfolding and free fatty acids, and oxidative stress increases, which creates these reactive oxygen species and pro-inflammatory cytokines. And that can actually restrict the blood flow to the beta cells and destroy their function. And it increases that beta cell death, apoptosis, which is that programmed cell death there. So, yuck. And that's what I was saying, like you could do an ELISA test for this interleukin 6, because that can predict that's an inflammatory marker, like C-reactive protein you could get tested as an inflammatory marker. But you would have to ask for the C-reactive protein test specifically. And then we talked also about brain insulin resistance, where you have cytokines interfering with the leptin and the insulin signaling in your brain at the level of the hypothalamus, which distorts those hunger and satiety cues and signals. And that's where like ghrelin and leptin and so many other hormones come into effect there. Then you've got that inflammation, which can upregulate the sodium glucose cotransporter 2s in the kidneys, and that increases the amount of glucose that they're reabsorbing. Instead of trying to use that as a way to get rid of excess glucose, it takes it back in because it's saying, it feels the cells are starving. It gets that signal, hey, we're hungry, and it's not helping anything. Then we've talked about the islet amyloid polypeptide toxicity again. Let's see, gut microbiome dysbiosis. So you could have that leaky gut, which is allowing bacterial endotoxins into circulation, which is really, really causing low-grade inflammation. And then the last talk that we did, the last podcast that we did was on mitochondrial dysfunction. So these mitochondria under stress are releasing electrons down that electron transport chain, thus producing excess reactive oxidative species and further just adding fuel to the ugly fire. And then it's just that inflammation that burns through every one of these areas, and it's impairing every tissue's ability to respond to insulin, to produce insulin, to keep normal metabolic homeostasis, keep everything in check.
It sounds to me like, and I know that there's a number of factors, but it sounds to me like if I could get a wrap on inflammation, if I could really aggressively target chronic inflammation in my body, I would really, really put a hurting on diabetes.
Good job.
Is that?
Yes.
Is that, because I mean, like.
Yes, your reading comprehension, sorry, not reading, your listening comprehension is high.
Well,
you got it.
Every single episode, the kind of, the prescription is a more plant-based, fiber-rich, whole food diet and increased movement-rich environment.
Right. The aim being to reduce inflammation.
But yeah,
yes.
Inflammation not only predates a diagnosis, probably by decades.
Yeah,
right?
about 15 years.
But pervades every single one of the core defects. It is if not a direct cause, is a contributor to the defects. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we are now aggressively anti-inflammation. Is that fair to say? We're in the business of kicking inflammation in the butt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think you've used the term metabolic warfare, like you really like that and held on to it. And this is you can absolutely tie inflammation into that description. Well,
the reason I bring it up, we had an opportunity to talk with a guy from another podcast about Charcot-Foot. And Charcot-Foot does not exclusively affect people with diabetes, but many people that have Charcot-Foot have diabetes. And in doing a little bit of the research for that, very abundantly clear that it was inflammation was really causing that particular disease. So, forget diabetes. If I can get a wrap on inflammation,
right? If
I can aggressively stomp down inflammation at its source, I can probably affect a lot of just disease. Period.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about what you said with Charcot-Foot is that it can tend to affect younger people with diabetes because their acute inflammatory response is higher than someone who's older. And because of that acute inflammatory response, it creates greater damage for whatever reason. Lots of mechanisms going on with Charcot-Foot.
The way you described it was the suppleness of the blood vessels just due to being younger allows for a greater inflammatory response. That's crazy.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
No.
What medications help with this? And I'm guessing we're probably going to hear a little bit about stuff outside of the normal prescribed for diabetes, right? Because inflammation is kind of just so broad.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of medications that are examined to reduce inflammation in type 1 and even really cool stuff to, like, if you're at risk for, if you were identified at risk for type 1, to start a medication prior to or at like the very earliest signs to help prolong diagnosis.
Yeah.
So those are really cool. But for the purposes of this with type 2, we'll discuss statins because statins are, even though not diabetes specific, they definitely lower inflammation markers and may protect against vascular complications.
Well, I'm thinking even simpler than that. Like, if I'm inflamed, I take some ibuprofen or something like that. Is that not really?
Well, you're just putting a Band-Aid on something that's happening. And it's like if you have pain, you could take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, but at some point you've got to address the root cause of the pain.
Nobody's prescribing these for somebody's life.
Yeah,
basically.
you don't want to take an NSAID for the rest of your life. They can create lots of GI problems. In fact, one of the major causes of gastrointestinal bleeds and admission to hospitals for GI bleeds are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, like a lot of and over-the-counter things that people think are safe.
Wow.
Landing people in the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got metformin. I'm sure you could have guessed that I was going to say metformin.
Number one prescribed for a reason, I guess.
Yeah. It reduces the C-reactive protein and tumor necrosis alpha factors.
Okay.
Then your GLP-1 receptor agonists, those can lower like systemic inflammation and may reduce oxidative stress markers. And I think a lot of that is in the way that they help people lose weight. You reduce weight, then
just in general, weight comes down, inflammation comes down. Yeah. Okay.
And then pioglitazone, Actos, the TZDs activate those PPAR gamma receptors to reduce inflammatory cytokines in the fat tissue.
Is that all fat tissue or visceral fat, or is it just?
That's a great question. I think I think it's any fat tissue, but probably more specifically, if you're talking about like brown fat versus white fat, it'd be more white fat.
Okay.
Yeah. Then your SGLT2 inhibitors, those can reduce oxidative stress and improve mitochondrial health in some studies. Very interesting stuff there. And then we talked about statins, but the truth is like none of those are fixing the problem in and of themselves.
Right.
They're helping, not fixing it.
Right. Kind of like spraying water on a fire, but not eliminating the additional combustible materials surrounding it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you could squash bugs all day long, but if you're never washing the dishes and leaving food out, especially in Florida, you're gonna have more bugs. It's kind of the same thing. Sorry for that gross analogy, but I think it's really applicable to this.
Using that same analogy.
Are you sure you want to use the same analogy?
How do we get to the source? How can we effectively treat the source of inflammation?
I think really looking at, guess what I'm going to say? Whole food, plant-based diets. Now, in mine, I'm not saying that you have to go vegetarian or vegan, but I believe that we've very much had it backwards in modern society, and that you've got this big hunk of meat as the center of your plate. When I was growing up, the whole meal was centered around the meat dish. The meat dish is front and center, and it's what complements the meat dish. And it's been a learning within myself and a way to help other people is really how do you get that more of a side item and keep fresh veggies and whole grains front and center as the staple there.
So I'm going to ask a question.
We'll just ask it.
As I always do. Humans have always eaten meat, right? It's been at least a part of our diet forever.
Well, we're herbivores.
Herbivores or
omnivores?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Omnivores. Okay. I'm like, we're herbivores and we eat meat.
You're definitely an herbivore.
Omnivore.
Yeah.
I might be more omnivorous than most, but yeah.
Most human cultures forever have had some meat in their diet.
Yeah.
So
and we could have a whole podcast about this as well, because it wasn't like today's mass produced meat production. I had a client once who worked in a chicken plant, or he was an engineer, and he quit because he's like, for so many years I looked at like how to engineer things to kill chickens faster, like holding their heads by this thing and just zip with like a V-like thing that just plop their heads off and they dump into a bucket. It was just like, that was eye-opening. Like, there have been several things throughout the course of my profession and career, that interactions I've had with people, things that I've read about, different.
Is it the difference between, try and get the words right? To me, it sounds like the difference between butchering and processing.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, like at some point in time,
depends on how you mean it, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't every day.
When we got really good at processing, to me says like animals at scale. Like for a long time, you'd go and you'd kill the animal,
you
and
kill the one,
you'd butcher it, and you'd eat it, and all that other kind of
parts,
stuff.
Yeah.
That you weren't,
It was an event. It was something celebrated. It wasn't like every single meal,
But I mean, there also wasn't a lot of like other stuff that had to go in on the front end to prevent the animal from being sick. There wasn't a lot of, there's just a lot more. We've gotten really good at producing, not just beef, but just meat period at scale. Right.
Yeah.
In doing that is some of the other stuff that's gone into just producing this volume. Creating, is it a quality issue? Is it other stuff's in the feed or stuff on the front? Like what's different with it now? Is it I just have more meat in my diet, or is it the quality of the meat, or is it a combination of the two? What's
I'm gonna go with the combination of the two for 1,000, Alex.
All right.
So yeah, and again, that's a whole nother episode, rabbit trail. But yeah, it is. We have not had such an abundance of readily available meat thus far. And the practices that have come into play versus the homegrown farmer, living off the land kind of thing, very different these days. And then you could talk about the meat consumption in the United States of America versus other nations. I mean, you could, it's a whole conversation.
But don't you kind of see that on the vegetable side too? I mean, most of our agriculture is kind of really,
you do
really
in some ways,
scale.
yes. Like something we spoke about, or I spoke to, I don't know if you did, but the last about the fact that we kind of do this single source grain.
Yeah.
In many ways, the food supply is a whole nother podcast, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting nutrition from our food supply. Like, let me be clear. It's not to scare people away from eating. I think it's very important that we don't do that. I think it's very important that we don't cause frustration in people so that they throw up their hands and say, well, I just don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing. I might as well just eat whatever. Like that is counter to what I'm about and what I want this podcast to be about. So I want to be very clear with that. And as we have discussions around this, to have discussions, but then keep the main thing. And the main thing is you can get absolutely high quality fruits and vegetables from your local supermarket, from your local farmer's market. Of course, it'd be great if you could go support your local farmers from the farmer's market. But if you can't, your local grocery store has really great options, especially frozen options. Can harvest the fruit or the vegetable at peak ripeness and keep it pretty pristine through all the transit to get it to you. So yeah, that's what I want to say about that is we have an unprecedented time where we have access to healthy food like we've not really had much of throughout human history. So, in summary, whole food, plant-rich eating patterns are going to lower inflammation, especially when they're high in fiber, antioxidants, and your phytonutrients. And you really want to make sure to get your omega-3 fatty acids, and you can get those from flax seeds, chia, walnuts, and your magnesium-rich foods are important, beans, greens. Like, I sound like a broken record because we've talked about these and other podcasts, some of the same things.
But that's what works.
Yeah, it is what works. Yeah. And not to spend a lot of time talking about like what to not do, but you really want to avoid ultra processed foods. And that will be a podcast topic, no doubt. Ultra processed foods, like what is that? Defining it out a little more. But broad strokes, if it has 30 ingredients that you can't pronounce, and I even hate to say that because I've seen influencers take that and go wild in a bad direction with it. But if it's like 30 ingredients long and you can't pronounce it, it's probably a processed food. Okay. Not always, but probably. I'd be hard pressed to find one that isn't, but I'm sure they exist. And it really lowers that endotoxin burden when you avoid ultra processed foods and the inflammation that comes with that. And then guess what I'm going to say?
I'm guessing some activity, some more movement, some more exercise, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And we've talked multiple times about how you can overcome insulin resistance by skeletal glucose uptake.
Or at least a good portion of it can be mitigated through movement alone. Yeah.
Exactly. And that really boosts your anti-inflammatory pathways, and even modest movement can reduce interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha over time. It's not going to be like a one-time thing. It's more chronic exercise.
I lifted all the weights.
Yes. Yeah, because then you will have acute inflammation from that. So, yeah. And then always, when I was talking about how 30% of people have that low-grade inflammation, that can be triggered also through poor sleep and high stress.
Yeah, I've personally experienced this where, went and had a blood test after a night of bad sleep, and the markers were all over the place. A lot of false positive, but it was a direct response to just one night of bad sleep. Yep. So,
and that's been shown in studies.
A lot of folks out there, you got diabetes, you may or may not be on a CPAP. If you're not getting that good sleep, if you're not doing what you need to do to make sure that your body is able to
rest and recover,
to heal tissue. That was such an eye opener to me that it's only during that deep sleep phase that my body heals. Growing up around athletics and that kind of stuff, it's like, you lift the weights and you break the muscle down, you put the fuel in and your body rebuilds. Like, if I break down and I don't rebuild, I just keep breaking down.
Yeah.
And that's what, results in tissue damage and all that other kind of stuff. It is such a critical part, and I think largely ignored part of kind of best practices. How do we not get sick to prioritize getting good at sleep. And again, we'll have a sleep episode, promise. But that's still relatively new information to me. How do I train to get good at sleeping?
Yeah.
Because it is such, if inflammation is foundational to all of these defects, sleep is foundational to really all of the positive outcomes that I want to have. You want to lose weight? You need to get better at sleep. Like all of that stuff, it really does pervade just so many things that we just discount it. We just like, I'll just go to bed whenever and I'll just wake up when I'll be fine. We
discount it until we understand better. I don't discount it anymore, but I definitely have been guilty of discounting it in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even at one point I'd read that you can't make up for lost sleep. And I was like, oh, dang, but I didn't know what that meant, but then just the more studies that come out that elucidate the secondary and tertiary effects of poor sleep are like, whoa, okay. I need to prioritize this, or I want to prioritize this.
Yeah, one researcher went so far as to say that like 100% of aging is related to not 100% efficient sleep.
That's
like the reason you don't live forever is you're not perfect at sleep, and those that not perfect sleep over a lifetime is what degrades everything. So
it's an interesting take. I'm not like, I heard you say that before, but I would love to see that study and know what that is.
We'll have it on the podcast.
Okay. Yeah. When we do the sleep part, I'll let you cover that. Yeah. So, and then I think something that we have not talked enough about, like we've mentioned it, but I think I personally don't feel that we have brought this to the forefront as much as it deserves. And that is weight loss. The role of weight loss and remission cannot be understated.
Yeah.
And just like for every 5 to 10% weight loss that you have, you can drastically reduce inflammatory markers, drastically reduce your risk of getting type 2 diabetes in the first place, and you can help put it closer to remission the more weight you lose.
Okay.
And that's because, and then like if you do achieve diabetes remission, that reverses many, if not all, of these inflammatory and oxidative pathways at the root. If you don't have diabetes anymore, you don't have this coming up. And then there's something related to this that I wanted to bring up, and it's around hormones and their role. And one that we haven't talked about before is adiponectin. And the fact that plasma adiponectin levels are negatively correlated with body fat. So in other words, the circulating levels of adiponectin are low in obese individuals. And those low levels are associated with type 2 diabetes, hypertension, a high BMI, like BMI into the obese category, and also inflammatory markers. And adiponectin so we want this to be high because adiponectin has a protective effect on the pancreatic beta cells because it helps them keep their cell mass. It keeps them healthy and functioning properly. And so like naturally, if you can improve adiponectin levels, you can improve these inflammatory markers and keep the beta cells healthier. So some ways to do that would be weight loss, primarily through some sort of caloric restriction. And the way that I mean caloric restriction here, the best outcomes are with very minor caloric restriction over time. So you are expending more energy than you're taking in. You're moving more than the energy that you're taking in, so that over time you're at a deficit. And you could also, through nutrition, increase your adiponectin levels through carotenoids. Those are largely found in your vitamin A foods, carrots, bell peppers, things like that. And polyphenols which would be blueberries, green tea, coffee, olive oil, turmeric, apples, pears, plums, lots of herbs and spices, especially like cloves, oregano, rosemary. And then also through omega-3 fatty acids, your alpha linoleic acids, your eicosapentaenoic acid, your DHA, which is in flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts, hemp seeds, fatty fish, and algae oil. And then if you're going to do algae oil, make sure it's third-party tested, like it's got that NSF or the USP seal, because you want to ensure the purity and potency for that, and probably somewhere like 250 to 500 milligrams of the DHA plus EPA.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think to try to like bring it all home, you've got inflammation, you've got oxidative stress that interweave throughout all of this, and they're not just because you have type 2, they are like gas on a fire.
Almost directly tied to all of the
every
defects
single
of type
one.
2. Okay.
But they're also the most reversible through lifestyle choices. And your plate, your sleep, your steps, your mindset, it all matters. It's not like just this one thing, just this other thing. It all comes together and it all matters. So if you want to try to get more clear on all of this, you can listen back through the series. But this is really the bring it all home episode. Like, what are the key takeaways? What are the key learning things to do is have more fruits and vegetables, 5 to 9 servings a day of fruits and veggies. Making sure you're getting enough fiber, beans, peas, lentils, those things, whole grains. Try to get a grain other than wheat, farro, quinoa things. It's so funny. I mentioned quinoa and people just immediately are like, what? I don't know about that. That took it too far. Quinoa. Like, it's like, have you ever had it? Well, no. So like, just try it. Hey, Mikey, try it. You'll like it. So just try a different grain, steel cut oats, those sorts of things, and move, look at where you are and how you can add on to that and how you can keep it going. That's kind of the hardest part, is how do you keep the momentum going from where you are? Like take a really good evaluation of where you are right now, and then think about how you can add to it, because that's what this is. It is incremental steps away from diabetes. So, yeah.
Okay. So what's next?
I don't know. Probably we have a list. We have a running list when we think of ideas.
So every time on the podcast that we've said there's probably a podcast about that, after we, clean it up, we write that down. So if we say that there's going to be a podcast about that, there is a list. There will be a podcast about that.
This is when we get into, in my opinion, the more fun, actionable stuff that I kind of do every day, because I'm not a researcher. I don't research pro-inflammatory cytokines in my spare time every day. But I do understand what an anti-inflammatory diet looks like. And it's more about what's the practical application of the nutrition piece. So I can't wait to move beyond this. I believe this was a very important thing to cover right up front. Right. So for people who think that it's just this one thing, it's just, if I just stop eating bananas, like the ads that I see on YouTube and different social channels, like they just hurt my brain. Well, I'm like, what is this nonsense?
It does, in kind of a perverse way, offer a little bit of hope. Oh, if I just did the one thing, it would be fine.
Very perverse.
But the reality of the situation is exactly what you said. This disease is incredibly complex, and
but the solution doesn't have to be. And I think that's an important message.
As it relates to inflammation, it's happening everywhere. I can't point to it. I can't cut it out. Right. So unless that strategy is going to affect me, is going to counteract inflammation at the cellular level, it's not going to be an effective strategy. So, you'd mentioned I'm a big fan of metabolic warfare. Amber's right. We aren't researchers. If we were a military unit, we would not be a strategic unit. We're a tactical unit. We are in the trenches combating this on a daily basis. So, if you are interested in better fighting this disease every day, check out, obviously continue to, if you haven't done it yet, please follow the podcast. That really helps us.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Helps to kind of promote us within the different platforms to get the voice out there for us to be able to continue providing, this free podcast. It's good information, guys. Use it. And then there's always empowereddiabetes.com. If you are, I would say if you're at a phase in your life where you're just starting to get a little sniff or essence of retirement, you're just starting to get to a point where you're starting to, I'm looking at my financial planning and all this other kind of stuff. And there's a bucket list of things I can't wait to do when I stop working. And,
but you're feeling a little tired and you're feeling a little run down. I just got a diagnosis of pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. Do not sit on this. This will affect the rest of your life in ways that you cannot comprehend. Foresee. And let me tell you, if you are still working, there is no reason to not knock this out this year. not this quarter.
Yeah. I mean, get on it, guys. If you want the absolute fastest path to diabetic remission, that's what we do. So again, if that's not something you're interested in, please listen, please follow, like and subscribe. But empowereddiabetes.com, that's our business, and diabetes, type 2 diabetes remission is what we specialize in. So stay tuned. We'll have a lot of good strategies going forward. We're actually going to have a couple of interviews with some folks that are in some kind of special areas here coming up. Just a lot of good stuff going forward. I'm looking forward to it. This has been a great opportunity to get the word out that this does not have to get worse.
Yep. Yeah. That's the main thing, to offer hope, to offer understanding of why me.
Yeah.
To help you really have a clear idea of things that you can do to take this and put it in reverse. Not saying that you can undo everything, but you can absolutely turn that ship around.
Yeah. All right.
So thanks for joining us. We appreciate having you, and we value you, and we thank you so much.
Yeah. And we will talk to you next week. So there you have it. The 12th of the core deficiencies that affect type 2 diabetes. Thanks for joining us today. If this series has changed how you see diabetes, share it with someone you love. You're not stuck. You're not broken. You're not alone. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.